And then he said, so behind me is Justin McRoberts, and he's the artist that we will be focusing on this year. And I'll be honest, he's not very good right now. I think Justin will be making music 15, 20 years from now, and I think it'll be really good. So I'm making a long-term investment. If you want to make it with me, great. If you don't, I don't care. And then he walked off.
I'm JJ Heller.
And I'm Dave Heller.
And this is Instrumental.
In every episode, we explore the instrumental moments that made our guest who they are today.
We hope our conversation reminds you that every second matters, because none of us knows which moment will be the one that changes everything. Big love happens in the small moments. Hey everyone, it's JJ.
Hey everyone, it's Dave.
Welcome back to another episode of Instrumental with
Dave and JJ.
Yeah, your name is in it now.
By this point in the show, we've already said our name. In the intro, it's like, I'm JJ Heller, and I'm like, I'm Dave Heller, and then like the intro ends, and then you're like, hey, it's JJ, and I'm like, hey, it's Dave. And
okay, well then maybe I should say, hey everyone.
It's JJ and Dave.
No, but they'll know it's me. And they'll know it's you without having to say our names.
Yeah.
Hey, everyone.
It's JJ and Dave.
No! That's not what I'm saying.
Okay, please continue.
Today we have a lovely conversation with our friend, Justin McRoberts.
Justin is one of those guys who wears a lot of hats. Like, he's an author, he's a speaker, he's a communicator, he has a career in music as well, he was a pastor, he does life coaching. It's like he does all of these different things.
Yeah, he's super talented. I also love following him on Instagram. He just always posts the most poignant, insightful things, and it always makes me stop and ponder for a moment.
We've known Justin for probably 15 years, something like that.
Yeah, and he's always had awesome hair. It's gone through several different stages.
Yes.
Like he used to have like kind of long flowing hair.
I was so jealous.
Justin actually just released a new book called It Is What You Make of It. And he has two kind of prayer meditation books called May It Be So and Prayer that he co-wrote with our previous guest, Scott Erickson. And I love, love, love those books.
In addition to the big list of things that Justin does, he's a great communicator, really easy to listen to. And he even is a podcaster. Like, he has a show called the At Sea Podcast. And we've been a guest on his show, JJ.
That's right.
But I think I've never actually heard his whole story until we sat down and spoke with him for this episode. Mm-hmm. He had some really profound things to say. And I know you guys are going to enjoy listening in on our conversation with Justin.
Just a warning, there is some talk of suicide in this episode. So if that's a trigger for you, or if you have little ears listening, you might want to skip this one. If you wanted to have a career in music in the late 90s, living in Nashville would make a lot of sense. Justin, however, grew up in a town outside of Oakland, California. But even though he didn't have connections with the major Christian labels of the time, he happened to be living in the perfect place. I'll let Justin explain.
I would love to hear how you came to meet Frank Tate.
Frank was a bit of a legend. There were all these stories people would tell about this person, like odd, remarkable stories. Like, he was a guy who owned 9 cars in college and somehow at the end of owning 9 cars had made money. What? Who is this man? I heard that Frank was renting out a room. I was on Young Life staff for 4.5 years, so I was raking in insane amounts of cash.
Oh yeah, that's like a highly lucrative,
very much so,
like youth ministry job.
Yep, that's why I took it. So I took the job doing youth ministry with Young Life, because I was like, all the big cash is with the kids. So then I was actually supplementing my income as a youth minister by substitute teaching, because if the real money isn't in youth ministry, well, by golly, it's got to be in public education. So literally I was making like $700 a month. And Frank was like, hey, if you guys are open, I'm going to try to put a bunch of kids in this house because my wife and I are moving. And so my buddy and I and like 2 other single guys in like a house. Like we had all had like rooms, other places or apartments, but this was like a house. We got in trouble kind of a lot. We'd never seen a glass top stove before.
Okay.
And we didn't know that you still needed to use the pans on the glass top stove. And so there was a grilled cheese incident. It's a very expensive grilled cheese. And at one point, someone showed up at the door. I'm just home with my buddy Chris. And we open the door and the guy standing goes, yeah, I'm here for the armoire, which is a word we had never heard before. We're like, what? He says, armoire. I was like, French, fantastic. Say it again. And we don't know what it is. He's like, this thing. He's like, oh, we're the entertainment system. And he points at like the big wooden thing in the corner that Frank has his television and his stereo system in. We disassemble all of Frank's tech, carry the armoire out to the truck, load it into his truck. This dude hands us some cash and then drives off. Later that night when Frank walked in, he's like, what happened? We're like, what happened? What do you mean what happened? Like the guy came and bought the armoire. He's like, what guy? The guy from the Craigslist ad. He's like, there was no Craigslist ad. We're like, but man, come give cash, take armoire. And, which like the best part of that story for me is like somewhere in Concord, California that night, that poor guy was like showed up and his wife is like, this is not the furniture I sent you to get. But like Frank had all this like grace and room for us. And he came to me about 3 months in, and I was just tinkering around with music. And he said, have you thought about playing music for, to make a living? I was like, no, I haven't. Do you think the songs are good? And he's like, no, I don't think I think the songs are bad, but I like you. Now, Frank ran a record label. This is how he's making a living. And so it was like this really weird, like the music guy wants to talk to me about my music, but he thinks it's bad. And he wants to help me out, which is just a very emotionally confusing moment. I find myself later that year at a showcase in Nashville with a bunch of record label executives. I mean, you've been in the showcases and especially the way they used to work, where there was a lot more fanfare. Folks would walk in and they would hand out all this free stuff. And it was like coffee mugs or Snuggies or those like CD visor things with all the CD for the cars.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And they would, it's like the Word Records one, and it's all the Word Records that are getting released that year. So they've handed all this free stuff, hype up their artist. She's the greatest thing to ever happen in music. She's like John Lennon meets Tom Petty with some Aretha Franklin in there. And then they would perform. And Frank literally gets up in front of all these people. This is 100% true. He goes, so I'm Frank Tate. I'm with 5 Minute Walk Records. And we didn't bring you any free stuff because we don't feel like we should have to bribe you to pay attention to us, was the first thing he said. And I was like, do you have adult friends? And then he said, so behind me is Justin McRoberts, and he's the artist that we will be focusing on this year. And I'll be honest, he's not very good right now. And the room like froze. Like you could feel people be like, are you kidding? And if you're not, this poor boy. He said he's not very good right now. But I think most of the artists who are here this morning probably won't be doing what they're doing 2 or 3 years from now because it's really hard. I think Justin will be making music 15, 20 years from now. And I think it'll be really good. So I'm making a long-term investment. If you want to make it with me, great. If you don't, I don't care. And then he walked off. And then I had to play a song, which was actually not very good. And I know that now. Frank, was this, honestly, one of those folks who, lived up to these legends of, he's a person who would take massive risks on other people. I wanted to live like that with other people as well. What's it look like to be that kind of person who, when you step into someone's life, they think differently about themselves kind of for the rest of their lives? That's how I met Frank. If someone says, hey, you're not good at this, but I'm going to throw $20,000 at a record that I know isn't going to be very good. It's I knew what money was. It's not like I was stupid. Or oh, it's just $20,000. I literally make $685 a month. This dude threw $20,000 at a record that like, and then told me I'm not good at music. What is this? That first year, like it gave me the freedom and energy to like learn and grow. Maybe I could get good at this.
What are some lessons that you remember learning as you made a $20,000 record, having very little experience making Christian music at all?
Yeah, he was 100% right, because I was not a great musician. I wasn't even good, but I was making relationships on the road. Like I went out on these tours with bands that were legit good at their job. I wasn't, but I would connect with people. And that was Frank's thing. He's like, I like you as a person. So I'm going to invest in you as a person, and you're going to go out and make connections. And then as you get better, people will continue to bring you in because they like you. And then your art gets better on top of that. The big lesson is like Seth Godin says, that art is anything you create that forges a relationship between people. That regardless of how skilled or unskilled I was, it's always going to be about the connection I forge with people. It's always going to be about relationship. Because then that translated into everything. That translated into like church planting. It translated into community building. It literally translates into like interpersonal relationships. The gifts that I have to offer, my strengths, all of those things kind of take a back seat to the forging of the actual connection I have with people. It's about the relationship and not about the gift.
It strikes me as funny that Frank could identify that quality in you and love that about you and was willing to invest in you because you're so good at connecting with people, when he himself seems to be so abrasive and kind of off-putting.
I know.
But he's like, I value that characteristic in you.
Yeah. He's one of those folks. He doesn't really have big dreams of his own. He's never had this like, here's the thing I want to build and accomplish and the legacy I want to leave behind. He likes establishing, understanding what's good in you, what's beautiful and true in you, and how do we get you actually functioning all the way there? Like, what's your dream? How do we get you to that dream? He's one of those folks. Those folks often aren't super friendly. Like, they're really purposeful and they're they're hyper-focused. Like, we're going to get somewhere. You might not love how it feels all the time, but like, we're going to get you there. He's not trying, like you said, he's not trying to make friends. He wants to help me make friends. There were a couple songs, one in particular that from the very first record that like people would know as I started to play it, which was mind-boggling to me. That like I would start to play and I would start to sing and I would see lips moving, and it was this like, again, that connection piece. Like this lives in your brain somewhere. Numbers wise, like the record did better than we thought it was going to, specifically because like there was a song from the record that got onto, is it AC and there's CHR? Is that the other one?
There are two different radio formats, and AC was like Amy Grant and you know the
softer
and
softer, more like church type music kind of, and then CHR had a little bit of room for more like songwriter, grittier type stuff.
Yes.
That's right.
So it like this got onto some CHR stations, and people like really liked this. It was a goofy, super goofy song, and people really, really liked it, which was bonkers, super bonkers to me, because I didn't. Like I knew that it was cute and fun, but I didn't really love it as a song because it felt like it just feels weird.
Can you quote a couple lyrics?
Oh, Dave.
You're making him squirm.
I can't believe I'm doing this. I went alone to the high school dance. I saw a pretty girl and thought I'd take a chance, but her boyfriend is a gorilla with a bat named Lance.
I'm running for my life. That's just the way it goes sometimes. I am the fifth.
The whole song is about like opportunities and failures and feeling like an outsider, which was how I was feeling at the time, and I didn't have the emotional maturity to communicate it in a song that was like, I don't know, interesting. But it's a song called Fifth Wheel, and it has literally chased me for years. Like, there are songs like deeper into my career, I'm like, this is my jam. I feel this, I identify this. And people are like, oh, I like that song. You know what I really like is this song from your first record. And you're like, I hate that song so much. Like, I'm embarrassed. Like, yeah, it's a life-changing song. That was that song where folks like really, really connected with it. And I was like, okay.
You're kind of known for this silly song that you wrote. But at that time, what was it that you were really hoping to communicate to people?
Part of what was going on with me was like I was looking for ways to explore and communicate with other people about my identity process. The silly song was fine, but I wanted to be writing things that helped other people figure out who they were in the world, in Christ, in relationship to other people and family. That's the thing I was actually up to in the core of me.
Can you just spend a little time touching on all the loss that you experienced through this season of your life?
Yeah. I remember someone else describing it this way. It was a little bit like walking through like a minefield. Every few steps, something would go off that was surprising and terrifying. So this is just post high school. This is like 20, 21, 22. The young woman that I was dating at the time turns out had a heart problem that no one had known about. She suddenly died, like out of the blue, mid-conversation while waiting tables, falls over across the table, end of life, 24 years old.
Whoa.
Young life kids overdosing, 2 kids overdose, had a girl, which we knew when she came in, her name was Jenny. Jenny was early to get into high school, so she was 14. And by the time she was 16, she had died of leukemia. My best friend, his mother passed away of cancer. She had a really dramatic tail end the last couple weeks. By the time I got to like 27 years old, I'd been to like 20 plus funerals of folks that weren't like 3 or 4 people removed. They were like within my sphere of influence and my actual social circles. And that included losing my dad.
Where were you when you got the news about your dad?
I was home. He'd been off for a while, and 2 weeks before he actually ended his life, he had tried. And so I moved back in with my mom to take care of business. And so I was in the house, and he had a handgun that I couldn't find. Because I searched the house. I did the highly responsible son thing, and I looked around the house for medications and anything that could, including guns. I've never been a big fan of guns. And I just took them and dropped him off at some place that melted guns down. And like I thought I'd found everything, but he had a gun and I didn't find it. I was in like my old room sleeping on the floor, and I woke up at like 2:45 in the morning to my mom like rushing around the house, like nervous, and kind of knew like he was gone, just had that feeling. So I was home. I found him in the backyard. He'd gone to the backyard to do it. So I didn't hear about it. I found him. It wasn't just that I lost him, but like the circumstances around his depression. I needed a place. I wanted to be able to process that by the encouragement of Frank. Like that process in you is for other people. We had conversations early on. He's like, I want you to be writing about that, which took us to the second record, was actually just called Father. It was almost exclusively about that process. Death, loss, grief, all of those things are like a significant part of who I am from the age of 19 to 27. How do I not only embrace that as a person, which I need language for me, but how do I actually then like do that in a way that potentially helps other people to do that for them as well? Because I'm not the only person who loses folks they love. I wanted to be able to do that for myself and for the people that I was writing for.
What was it like to go through just loss after loss like that?
I don't think I became numb. I mean, I was in shock at times. I started seeing a therapist when I was 20. Because it was a lot to process and I wanted to do that really well. And that's the thing, right? Therapy is not for hurt people or broken people. It's for people who want to be healthy. So I wanted to be healthy. I mean, 16-year-old, 18-year-old kids dying. Like, that's always shocking. I didn't see my father's depression leading to suicide. Didn't see it coming. So that's shocking. 24-year-old girlfriend. That's shocking. Like, it was all a shock. The thing that did settle in, which is a strange thing to say as a positive is I really did get comfortable is not the word here, at least familiar, something like a kind of marriage between the familiar and comfortable with the idea that life actually does end. It wasn't imaginary. It wasn't like a thing that exists in storybooks. It wasn't this thing I get to put off like, well, maybe by the time I'm in my 50s, 60s, 70s, I get to think about the end of my life. That became more normalized emotionally, that like life really actually does end. Like it was surprising, the particular loss, but I wasn't shocked that life ends because that actually does happen. I didn't get used to it. It was like, well, there goes another one. But I wasn't like, oh my gosh, it's so unfair. I stopped feeling that way. It wasn't a matter of unfairness. It was just like, yeah, that just sucks. That when people die, it just sucks. I can't fight against it because it just makes me feel worse. That's the part that kind of got normalized. It didn't feel unfair anymore. It was a fundamental reality of being alive, is that at some point I won't be, and so will everyone I care about.
Did that conclusion come from therapy?
I got clarity on it in therapy. It honestly came in art. I was into these darker things. I was listening to Nine Inch Nails and The Cure and Depeche Mode and all these like kind of darker themed things. Like on the other side of actual grief and death, part of what I realized is like these folks aren't just romanticizing these things. They're trying to actually provide language for an experience of death and grief and loss. You know, when Trent Reznor is writing about this hurt in his life, he's not just making it up because it's cool to feel sad. Like, no, he's been hurt. And these are the words he needs in order to put that thing somewhere. Because it's one thing to recognize that philosophically, it's a whole other thing to allow myself to feel it in my own body. I needed the therapy over the course of years to help me feel it and not be frightened by it.
Do you have like a specific memory or a story where that kind of came home?
Yeah. My mother and I initially went to therapy together. So these are people who had all lost someone to suicide or depression or alcoholism or some sort of like agency that took a loved one away. Almost all of them had lost like a parent or a spouse. So it was mostly like people who lost moms or dads or spouses. And I remember watching my mom, who, you know, she's got her own story. She grew up in poverty in New Mexico and, you know, saw all kinds of horrid stuff. But I watched my mom like let herself fall apart in front of a room full of people and just grieve and cry and not hold back. And I was like, whoa. And I had not seen that like from my mom because I'm just barely on the other side of being a teenager. And like, like as a mom, like you get to show your kids enough, you want to be really responsible about like, do you let yourself fall apart? And she was great. She was a wonderful, strong, incredible, strong, passionate, powerful woman. And watching her like actually give over to real grief and just cry and then watch the room of people just like let it happen and no one's checking their watch. I was like, that's fantastic. Like I could do that. I mean, the phrase like acquainted with grief, like we talk about when we reference the person of Jesus in this way, like he was acquainted with grief. I wanted to learn that. I wasn't acquainted, like I'd like a lot of people, I'd romanticized my own grief. I'd romanticized grief in general. I'd romanticized like the darker or harder elements of life. There were TV shows and songs. I wanted to actually she was acquainted with it. And as a person who was acquainted with grief, she wasn't diminished. Like we left and I was like, I didn't lose respect for my mom, but watching her fall apart, no one else did. Which is like, that's the narrative specifically with men, which is part of what went sideways with my dad was like, he was a white male who was informed by the culture around him that like your weaknesses are problems, your limitations are problems. You have to somehow circumvent them and get over them and, be strong and be a provider, the whole nine. I didn't want to be that way. I wanted to be more like my mom, who was like a very, very strong person. And part of her strength was that she was familiar with and acquainted with her own grief and comfortable expressing it when the time came. There are moments on that second record. I remember finishing a song with Mike Busby and Masaki and Jeff, and we were in the room, and I remember like all of us having this like, oh snap moment, like where like this song landed and we all kind of felt like, oh, that's exactly how that needs to feel. Part of that was like, I did it. It was like I want to achieve this thing. I want to achieve this emotional expression with this song without making it overwrought. And we all kind of felt it. The lyrics to the song, called Waiting for Your Love, is there's no pain so cutting or no battle as in vain as the constant battle to avoid this pain. You were poor when you were born.
See your father clearly through the nothing that you owe. Free me from these binds, Lord, I am choking on the gifts this.
Part of what my father bought was that his dominant value was his ability to provide. Who told you that? If we had had less, but he was still around, I would have taken that. Give me that. So being able to pin that in a song lyrically, one, to articulate that for me, and then be able to like have to put that out in the world and have people ask questions, and then have a conversation with someone in which they say like, I just had a kid and I'm feeling that exact thing and I don't want to. Fantastic. Let's have a conversation and get into like, how do you avoid depression long-term as a dad? Let's do that. I loved that. I felt that those are the connection points for me. Finding the language that worked for my soul. And when I was able to do that, recognizing that it connected with other people. Amy had read this excerpt in a magazine of a book called The Rest of God, Restoring Your Soul by Restoring the Sabbath. Mark Buchanan. It's a great book. And she was like, this feels really necessary. You know, this is Sabbath keeping and like rest. And like, we've been going really hard for several years. Like, yeah. I said, what's it about? She tells me the thing. I was like, okay. And she's like, we should read the book. I'm like, literally said, like, I don't have time. I don't have time to read a book on rest because I have work to do, was actually the conversation. And so she orders a book and she's like, no, this is really good. I think this is, I'm like, what are the cliff notes? What's the thing? She's like, well, here's what we're going to do. Like, I know that you're not going to get into this thing, but 7 weeks out, she points 7 weeks out on this particular day, we're going to Sabbath. I was like, okay, fine, whatever. It's 7 weeks out. I don't have anything on the calendar. No sooner had I said that than like probably it might have been the next morning or within the next couple hours, I get the text or email from my buddy Dan. He's like, hey, are you available this weekend, which includes the date that my wife had just set out for us to Sabbath. And I was like, yes, I'm available. What are you doing? I'm doing nothing. I agree to this thing. I'm going to come out for the weekend. And I say to Amy, I'm like, I'm so sorry. You know, you read the book, you wanted to do the thing, but I got a job. I have to take the job. And she's like, what's the job? I'm like, well, I'm going out to Heartland, Kansas City. And she's like, okay, what are you doing? I'm like, I don't even know. Like, I'm going to go do music and stuff, I think. And so I messaged Dan back, who's the pastor of the church, was the pastor of the church there at the time. Hey, what are we doing? He's like, yeah, so the church staff and I just read this book by a guy named Mark Buchanan. It's called The Rest of God, Restoring Your Soul by Restoring the Sabbath. We're doing like a whole weekend on the theme of rest. I was like, shut up. And he's like, so I'll send you a copy of the book. I'm like, yeah, you do that. So he sends me the copy of the book for me to read through for the weekend. I super don't. I read like the last few paragraphs in the back of the book and like a couple reviews just to get a gist so that I can do the job. I mean, talk about like, that was basically the shape of my spiritual life at the time anyways. How much God do I need in order to get the crap done? So I get there in Kansas City and I do the weekend. And on Sunday, he's like, you're tired. Like he's saying the same thing that Amy's saying to me. Like, you're tired. I'm like, yeah, but it's part of being an adult, right? That's the thing I said. It's just part of being an adult. Like he's like, no, but you're like tired. I was like, I'll be fine. Like it's, he's like, why don't you do this? You're supposed to go home on Monday. What if instead of going home on Monday, you stay? And Lisa and I are leaving town. You stay at our place. I'll give you 2 days. I'll give you some stuff to read and some like Sabbath practice stuff. I was like, actually, That actually does sound really good. I'll do that. I'm on stage during their last service, and I can feel my phone buzzing in my back pocket, and it's my buddy Kirk. And Kirk at the time was living in Nashville, and he's texting me, and he's like, "Are you available this week?" So after services, like I'm texting Kirk back, and I'm like, "Yes, I am available this week." He's like, "Can you get to Nashville?" I was like, "Yes, I can get to Nashville." "Can you be here on Monday?" "Yes, I can. I can be here. I can be in Nashville on Monday because I'm not doing anything." He's like, "Yeah, I had a song leader fall through. I don't want to ask another Nashville person to do it. Can you come and do the thing?" I was like, "Great." So I tell my buddy Dan, "I'm so sorry. I got a job. I got to take the job because if I don't take the job, the ball doesn't move and we got to make the money." And he's like, "Okay, what's the job?" I'm like, "I don't really know. And it's just some music stuff as a job." So at the airport, I call Kirk and I'm like, "Hey, so what is the thing I'm coming to do?" He's like, yeah. So you're doing like 5 sessions. It's just song leading. So thematically, you should know. So we're bringing in this author. His name is Mark Buchanan. He just wrote this book called The Rest of God, Restoring Your Soul by Restoring the Sabbath. I was like, "Are you kidding?" I walk into the building and the song leader that they had originally hired was standing there. And I was like, "Wait, hi." He goes, "What are you doing here?" I said, I'm supposed to lead songs." He's like, "No, I don't know what happened. Like, I never said I wasn't coming." Like, so literally like I feel like the spirit was like, "Oh, you want a job? Do you want a job? No job for you." And like suckered me into like sitting at the feet of Mark Buchanan. And the very first thing that Mark Buchanan said, literally he gets up in front of folks and he says, "I love being in Nashville because I love artists. I'm going to assume that you love what you're doing, which is why you do it. But if you want to be able to do this and love it long term, you have to learn to not do it." I was like, wow. I loved doing what I was doing, and I was pouring my life out. It was what Frank had said from the beginning. Like, I like who you are. I want you to give yourself away. And what Buchanan got to was like, you can only give yourself away healthily if you're healthy. And if you just stay committed to like the constant outpouring, you will eventually be unhealthy, and then you will just pass on your unhealth. And I'd never even begun to think about it that way. That was like the biggest thing. It was like, oh, I need to learn to not do this. I need to not be driven to give myself away so profusely that I give away my unhealth along with anything good I've got.
2 things. We were there.
Shut up.
I remember.
Yeah, you said you have the book, and it's on our shelf right now. I can picture exactly where it is.
Wow.
And I was like, Justin didn't lead music for that thing. Matthew did.
No, Matthew Perryman Jones and Kitty Herzig.
Yeah, that's right. You have this moment in Nashville where this idea of Sabbath is kind of like chasing you, and it finally catches you. And what happens as a result?
Over the course of the next 5 to 7 years, we pretty fundamentally revamp how we do everything.
Wow.
And start implementing days of rest, learning what that means for me. And I make a lot less money, end up feeling much happier about the work I'm making in the world. I do fewer jobs, but I really, really like the jobs that I'm doing. And then opportunities, beginning the year 6 or 7, opportunities and relationships that I would have never dreamt of being able to get into started popping up. Like doors were opening. Literally was like, and this is not one of those like, if you do good things for Jesus, he'll give you gifts kind of thing. But it was like, I was ready. I was allowing the Lord to restore and refine my soul so that I was actually the gift that I wanted to be. In the practice of rest, I started to become the person that I really wanted to become, so that I was ready for the things that I really wanted to do.
So what was an indication of health?
New ideas. I had the interest and the propensity to write instead of just write music, like most of what I do now.
That retreat was probably like 2007. Do you feel like there's some kind of marker of like, oh yeah, because like in 2009, this life shift happened. You know what I mean?
I had a kid, 2010. That was the thing I didn't want to do for the longest time. We weren't going to have kids. We both didn't want to have kids. It was like, nah. There's enough of those things. Also, have you seen the people who have them?
Talk about exhausted.
I know.
Exactly. We didn't want to have kids. Being open to the possibility of being open to having kids became a possibility.
And did you both come to that conclusion at the same time?
Same season. Amy came through a different doorway than I did. Hers was at least initially like way more interrelational, which like she was around people she loved who had kids and not just like knowing people who have kids. And a little bit more of a process. I had more like moment, which is a little bit that's how my psychology works. Is like I'll think things for a little while and I'll stew on them and like then there's lightning and like, oh, we're ready to go now. We'd been sponsoring this boy named Zabulon Omondi for I think it was 9 or so years at the time, maybe a little more than that. And we got to visit Zabulon in Kisumu City, Kenya. Great time, wonderful visit. And we got home, and about a week after we got home, which is very fast for a letter to arrive. Normally it takes 2 to 4 weeks for a letter to get to you from a kid you're sponsoring. But they expedited this letter because we had just been there and because Zabulon's dad, who we had just met, had died. He wrote this letter, so glad you were here. Want to let you know that my father had passed, sudden passing. And there's a lot to the letter, right? It's like 2 or 3 pages. Articulate, brilliant kid. Gosh, so smart. And in the middle of the letter, he said, some of the cheesy things where it's like, I know I have a father in heaven, which is like, you can mean that and not mean that at the same time. But then he meant it. And he said, I know that I have a father in heaven and you too are like a father to me. And I was like, oh my gosh. And those words just went, like I was softened enough at that point where like those words actually got into my soul and started resonating differently in the same way that like a room, like if you'll hit a note, either on mic specifically or on a guitar, like you like different rooms will resonate with certain notes. Like it's usually like a D or like an E flat, and the room will kind of buzz with it. Well, for like since I lost my dad, like my soul's like resonant note was like, you don't want to be a dad. And it was like this note came in and like broke up the architecture in my soul, and like it no longer rang in that note anymore. Like I'd been softened, and then this letter comes in, this very specific line, you are like a father to me. And I wanted it. Like, whoa, I'm open to wanting that. I wouldn't have, had I not been in some semblance of a practice of rest and like attending to my own soul and like knowing what's going on inside me, not just for the sake of other people, but that there's like an ongoing divine, wonderful work happening in me, I would not have been open to hearing you're like a dad and me thinking, gosh, I really want that. My daughter's 4. Her name is Caitlin Quinn River McRoberts. We call her the bird. My son is 11, Asa Jonathan McRoberts, and he is the dude. People get older and they get crotchety. Kids are great because they're truckloads of fun. And like, I just value the heck out of it. And so the fact that like my daughter, my wife was away for the weekend just now. So just me and the dude and the bird, we were driving to the airport to pick Amy up, and we dropped Asa off at school. Asa's my son. And I said to Kate, and I said, hey, Bird, I had a really great weekend with you. She said, me too, Dad. But why didn't we wrestle? And it's like, you know what? You're right. You're right. We should have wrestled. And like, those are her metrics for like life and joyous success. Is like, did you have fun? Like, yeah, it's a really good measurement of whether or not you're happy and successful in life. And my kids constantly remind me of that. Like, am I having fun? I really want to be having fun. I should have fun. If I'm not having fun, I'm probably doing it wrong. Because if it's true when you're 11, it should probably still be true when you're 60. So I would be having a lot less fun if I didn't have kids. I was scared to death of my own DNA. Like, that's in me. Like, I knew that my dad's family was an absolute mess, like mess. And that's like his blood runs in my veins thing. Where like that's part of my moral, ethical, emotional psychology comes from his bloodline. Mental illness, depression, overwork. Like, I'm the first person on either side of my family to have gone to college. It's never happened before. I knew that there was enough trauma and strife, specifically from my dad's side. Like, I didn't know what kind of power it would have on me, but I did feel like being responsible for a tiny human would probably unlock all that crap, and I knew that I wasn't strong enough to deal. Like, I don't want to be overwhelmed by that because I don't want to end up like my dad. Like, I don't want to feel that sense of responsibility of like, I can't. I don't want to have that fear overwhelming in the middle of the night where I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't pay for my kid's college. Like, I just didn't even want it. I didn't want the responsibility, and I didn't want to pass on unhealth. Like, I don't know how healthy I am. If I can control it and just kind of keep it, like if I can keep it on the guitar or keep it on paper, if I can just kind of keep it out here. But like if you, you have kids that are like all in your life and you're like, you have to like be like a whole person. And I just didn't trust the darker parts of me at all. And I knew I didn't. So I made a conscious decision. I'm like, I just don't want to have kids. And people do that all the time. And then this kid, man, this Zabon, we're still Facebook friends. We talk like 2 or 3 times a month. Upended my life with a letter.
That is amazing. I mean, it's so interesting to me because, you know, for so many years during our shows, we would tell our audience, like, look, you have this really beautiful opportunity to have a relationship with a child in another part of the world. You get to write letters and encourage them and ask them questions. And, you know, your letters will be so meaningful to your child. Like, they'll put photos of you up on their wall in their room. And so it's just so incredible to me that for so many years we like frame this as this is your opportunity to change the life of a child. And here's a child who literally changed your life by writing you a letter.
Yeah. We were on tour with Caitlin's Call. I was just an opening artist, and I was it was legit that opening artist who was like just enthralled with the whole thing. And like I would finish my set, then I would like go watch the rest of the set and be like, oh, it's such a good song. And then like every night Cliff would give this like incredible presentation. It was the same story. Like I said, 3rd or 4th night, I was like so moved. I'm like, like, I'm gonna sponsor a child. And so my wife and I went back and like did it because we were like actually moved by like the moment and by the presentation. It was a powerful deal. Zabon, we're still Facebook friends. We talk like 2 or 3 times a month. Last week we took the kids to Disneyland for the first time. And the very first comment on the photos of the kids at Disneyland was from Zablon, who refers to Asa as his brother. Like, just like in flow. Not like it's not cute. It's like sentimental. He's like, good to see my brother laughing so hard. It was like the comment. And people like, wait, who's that one, Justin? I'm like, that's an interesting story. Let me get into that. My dad was a big fan of music in general, and he liked live music a ton. He liked like swing and big band specifically, so he and my mom used to dance a lot. And there's usually music on, and we had like full-blown like old school record player with like this big fat monster record collection. I have all the vinyls that made up my parents' collection, and so it's like Patsy Cline and the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, John Denver, like they just had this like legendary record collection, and they would just spin records regularly. He took me to a John Denver show. We would regularly go to see like the San Francisco Symphony Orchestra or free outdoor shows. Watching my dad like really just become this other person, like in live music settings. But I remember my dad like just sitting back on his arms, like closing his eyes and like letting music kind of waft over his person, which like he was never in that posture. Like not that he was like an uptight guy, but he was always like on mission. But in live music moments, like he would just kind of settle in and just kind of relax and chill, and taking them up for, shows are like 90 minutes, 2 hours, symphony orchestra, 17 hours. Or so it seemed as a kid. It's like, this is long. Is this one song? Is this all one song? Can we not clap? I shouldn't clap? I don't understand. But like he just like sat and like took it in, which like that's a really distinct memory of watching my dad just be able to be somewhere without thinking too hard.
Do you feel like there's something about your dad's love of music that might have played into saying yes to Frank Tate once upon a time?
Yeah, I mean, this dream or desire in me to like be in front of people and make them feel things has like always been there. So the fact that my very focused, very driven, highly responsible dad would just give himself over to a moment and just kind of feel and settle in probably has some like kind of solve like effect on like my own desires for my own being. So I remember being 4-ish and having a Christmas party and getting up in front of people and telling jokes. And it wasn't just ego driven, like I wanted the room to laugh. Music made my dad feel, like feel. I would love to be able to do that for people. I wouldn't have articulated that as a 6-year-old, but I think I get that now.
You're in the process of cultivating language to be able to help other people process life. And all of this language that you're providing is informed by these experiences, both successes and tragedy. It's interesting to me to sort of like connect the dots between watching your dad close his eyes to music and Frank Tate seeing something in you and providing a space for you to create, and that leading to time on the road with Caedmon's Call that leads to you picking up a compassion envelope that leads to a connection with a kid who will eventually influence the decision of whether or not to have children of your own. I mean, these are influential moments that you didn't plan yourself.
Mm-mm. Like maybe I ignore it. Maybe I'm that leper. We don't have that story, right? We don't have the story where Jesus says, extend your hand, and then some leper doesn't. Right? We have the story in which the leper does extend his hand and his hand is healed, which is part of how you receive your healing is you actually have to receive it. So maybe I don't. Maybe I ignore him. I think God still comes back. It's like, okay, I'll give you some time and then we'll do this differently. The thing that Frank was right about, the thing that God's been up to the entire time is like, I'm going to make you into somebody because I love you. I will find a way to do that. That's what I do. And if you don't want that thing, okay, I'll give you a minute. I'll be back. I'm just trying to give myself away because at some point I won't have anything to give away. I'll be done. It'll just be over. And that's part of life because it all ends. If I've got time, they can't all belong to me. It's got to belong to my kids and my neighbors and people who show up at shows. Like, I've got time and energy. I'm going to give it away as best I can. I never questioned the goodness of God. What does it mean for God to be good? And part of what it can't mean is that God does the things that I figure will be good, even when my disappointment comes with pretty substantial injury and grief. What does it mean for me to call God good? It's a declaration I make that is bigger than my ability to understand it. I don't feel that. It feels like you're not. And something in the back of my head is saying, like, don't say that. But I'm going to keep saying that because I think the truth of that is more substantial, deeper, broader, and more than I can actually wrap my head around. I try to provide language for the process of life and faith. That's what I've been doing kind of from the beginning. Did it with music. I do it with books. I do it in coaching. I did it as a pastor. I try to do it as a dad and a friend. Like, I try to provide language for the process of faith and life. And somewhere in there is still like the voice of God through Frank Tate saying, it kind of doesn't matter how good you are. It doesn't matter as much how good you are at what you do. What Frank got to in me was like, even being really skilled at that is really about you passing yourself on. you're the gift you're giving. As God shapes and makes good things in you, give that away to other people who need you.
Well, I'm really glad that Frank Tate believed in Justin all those years ago. I think you can look at the body of work that Justin has offered to the world and see the way that he is speaking life over his listeners and his readers the same way that Frank once upon a time spoke life into Justin. And that's an amazing legacy.
Yeah, it's such a great reminder of how powerful words can be. And it doesn't even have to be on a grand scale. It can just be, how are you serving the people around you? What words of truth and comfort are you offering to your children, to your parents, to your friends?
Just as a little aside, I think it's still really cool that we were at that little retreat where Justin had that major revelation.
Yeah.
Like, that was really fun that our paths kind of intersected in that one little moment.
Yeah, it's pretty great.
If you want to find out more about Justin, you can visit justinmcroberts.com.
This episode of Instrumental was produced by me, JJ Heller.
And me, Dave Heller,
Our theme music is my song, Big Love, Small Moments.
that I helped write. You can always listen to JJ's songs by telling your smart speaker to play music by JJ Heller.
We'll be back next week with another episode of Instrumental, so be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.